teaching children that if you have a dream, a thought that you want to change the world, let's figure out how to do that, and giving them the skills and the ability to do that, because that's what's going to be important to other people. And I think that and volunteering in communities where you're not familiar with is really important to show that, you know, everybody doesn't live like you live. Everybody doesn't look like you look.
Throw out homework, worksheets, ominous buildings, hall passes, herds of students, grades, all of it. What would you build? If you start with the amazing thing that is a young person, how would you honor all of their strengths and abilities? How would you remember that this is about them? If Dewey was right, and education is not preparation for life, education is life itself, we need to do more than rebuild schooling. We need to rethink living. Welcome to the Education is Life podcast, where we're having honest discussions on the state of education, where it is, where it can be, and all of the stories in between. Welcome back to Education is Life. This episode, we're going to talk about education, life, and racism. We're currently in the midst of the protest sparked by George Floyd's murder by a police officer in Minneapolis. Our guest today is Mona Yaeger. Mona and I used to work together in higher education. Welcome to the podcast, Mona.
Hey, Rob. Good to be here.
Can you take a second and just tell the audience a bit about yourself?
So I am currently in the HR space working in talent management, which is a transition into what I used to do when you and I worked together, which is work in career services, which is finding graduates and students jobs upon graduation with their degrees. I was raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and went to high school there and went to the University of Kansas for my undergrad, and then got my master's at Kaplan a few years ago, and have been living in Chicago for about I think 23, 24 years now, and really love the city, really love being here. And, you know, having working in higher education prior to this transition in my career for a very long time, for I think about 15 years. So education is super important to me and very dear to me. And to me, it's a cycle that helps people break, or definitely helps them be able to, you know, get the career and the life that they've always longed for.
No, and you served a very important part at when we were higher ed together, in taking like first generation college graduates and helping them figure out how to parlay that into a good job. So you're really on the front lines of making sure that education did change the trajectory of their lives. And did a lot of good work there.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where you'd have a lot of conversations with people where you're kind of reinforcing to them, why did you go to college? It was to get this career. And that's actually how I got into career services. Was I was an admissions rep, and I always took the stance when I sat down and talked to my students, what is it you want to be when you grow up? What is it that you want to do, and why do you want to do that? And then helping them create that path so that they could not just go to school, because everybody doesn't love school, but it's the end result, which is the career piece. And that to me was important, to make sure that they were able to, you know, fulfill their dreams and do what they wanted to do.
You know, the reason I invited Mona onto the show today is that she correctly called me out on something I put on social media recently. I was reflecting on how if I had grown up in the police state situation that a lot of young Black men find themselves in, I'd likely be dead or in jail. The same traits that have allowed me to be successful in this country aren't necessarily seen as good traits when you're standing up for yourself, you're looking to make a difference, you're not satisfied. I don't know, being obedient and compliant has never been my strong suit. And so I was sharing kind of my viewpoint in a way to kind of start the conversation. And Mona called me out. She said, I think you started your response with, "That's all fine and dandy, Rob." And then you went on to talk about your experience. Can you share a bit of your experience with us?
Yeah, sure. So it's always fascinating to me when I talk to people in Chicago, whether it's socially or professionally, because I'm a Black woman, they always assume that I was raised here. And so I find that always funny to me, because it's like I wasn't, and my situation was very different. I was raised in a working class high school. Both my parents, my mom was a nurse. My dad was, for lack of a better label, was a blue collar worker. He had 3 jobs when I was in elementary school, and he eventually got his college degree when all 3 of his adult children had degrees. So there's 4 of us in our family, and I leave out the youngest one because she's 12 years younger. Education was very different for us because we lived in a working class neighborhood. I went to a working class high school, meaning that some kids were going to be okay and go to college, and some kids weren't. They were going to go work at the post office, or the gas station or go into the military or whatever, because there really wasn't that support for every single student to be successful. And so when you had a teacher that realized, that saw potential in you, which a lot of our teachers saw that potential in myself, my brother, and my sister, they really cocooned us and really kind of made sure that we were doing what we needed to do, had the exposure and the resources that we needed to be successful, because they knew the three of us were going to go to college. And it was an expectation for the one behind that they were going to follow the path for the first one. So I'm the oldest. So when I got to high school, it was expected that my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, to be able, that she was going to do the same thing I was going to do. And then my brother came 3 years later, and he had the same level of expectation. And then when my youngest sister came, who's 12 years younger, she literally had a teacher say to her, I expect good things from you because you are a Ewing child. That's my maiden name. You are a Ewing, so I expect good things from you. So she wasn't given a choice to be a slacker. She was expected to do well. But other students who didn't have that, they were kind of left on their own. They were kind of, your choices were either you're going to go to the military or you're going to get a job. They didn't give the resources and the support to say you could go to community college, you could go get a trade type of degree, and you could do something other than be a scholar. And so that's a lot of how my education was, is, I was very lucky.
And so you graduated from Kansas, right?
The lovely degree of communications. So nothing really with any skill set. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went back home and I worked at an amusement park. I became the director of operations, and I ran an amusement park for about 2-3 years, which was interesting and fun because I dealt with high school kids because that's who my staff was. But, I want to, going back to a little bit of that education piece for my family and the support that we got. So I went to the University of Kansas. My sister went to the University of Nebraska for about a year. And then she left and dropped out of school and went to California she's an artist. She was an artist. And then my brother went to Harvard. And so to have a male Black kid from Omaha, Nebraska to go to Harvard out of a working class high school, and he was the second person to go to Harvard from our high school. The person that went before him graduated in 1962. So massive difference between 62 and 89, I think, is when he graduated from high school, that he went to Harvard. And he told us at 5 that he was going to go to Harvard, and he did. And so it's really interesting, again, that when you have a mindset of this is what I'm going to do, and you're able to do it. And what was interesting to a lot of this is my parents were not super supportive people when it came. I mean, they wanted us to go to college. They wanted us to get a good education, but they weren't driving us. And I know that there's a lot of people now today who are driving their kids to really pursue that. And so what's interesting to me is we all just figured it out on our own. We just knew that there was more for us and there's more we wanted to do. And even though my brother went to Harvard, my sister did finish school and became an artist, and she got her master's in fine arts and a master's in art. She took a very different route in getting all of that done. But we never had drivers. We never had parents that were sitting over us, making sure our homework was done. And, we went to school on time. Like, they just never did that. We just did it ourselves, which is so incredibly not the norm.
Not anymore, right? To everyone who wants to get their parent gold star feels like they have to get their kid into Harvard or into something. Mm-hmm. And it's become this ridiculous, the pressure that young people are under to perform all the time. For something that they may or may not care about. So that I end up talking to a lot of young people who what they're interested in is just making money, because that's the equivalent of getting your A or your gold star or whatever it is. And that's how you define success, And so I think, Greenfields, one of the things that really got me going to get things started was this path that people are on, where it's like, I'm going to go to school, get good grades so I can get into a good high school, get good grades so I can get into a good college, so I can get a good job to make a lot of money to.
Exactly.
And that's where it stops. Right. And so, the stories of people who decided that, or were told that they were going to be lawyers or doctors, whatever, and go through all of that, take on all that debt, and then day one are like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? Is something that we work hard to make sure doesn't happen. But it sounds like you lived a middle class dream, right? You got there and you got to college, you became successful. That's like the whole story about, hey, this is how we're going to solve the race problem in this country. If only they had better schools and we could get them college degrees, then like that'll solve everything, right? And it's the current president's story, right? The economy will fix racism.
Yes. And, I think what people also don't understand about racism and education is, as a Black kid growing up, you will be lucky if you have enough role models to help you navigate that path. And my parents grew up very differently my uncles and aunts very differently. My father's side grew up Omaha, Nebraska. None of them went to college. None of his siblings went to college. They got jobs after high school. He actually had a baseball scholarship, but chose to go into Vietnam. So he, who knows what he would have been able to do. My mother's side of the family, they were all educated. She was raised in Charleston, South Carolina. They were all educated. And so when we were growing up, we didn't have a lot of role models that were adults that taught us that kind of thing. But what we did see, though, was people get up and go to work every day and achieve that type of fruit of their educational dream, even though my dad was, blue collar, my mother was a nurse. But when we started thinking that we wanted to make something of ourselves as kids, we got a lot of pushback from our own peers because we weren't Black enough. We didn't speak the vernacular. We spoke King's English. We were called Uncle Toms. We were called Oreos. We were bullied because we wanted to be educated and we wanted those good grades and we wanted that, honor society, type of thing. And that also was really challenging because you now had to work against your own group of people who should be supporting you and encouraging you and pushing you, who didn't care, that they just thought you were just trying to be white and you're just trying to get something that, why should we have that, And none of us were athletes. So it wasn't like, we had the athletic piece going for us. It was, we knew there was more in the world for us and we knew academics were going to get us there, but we also had to deal with our peers bullying us. And I remember my mother's really good friend, they had adopted a son and had seen, the things that we were doing. And their son was quite a bit younger than us. And they put him in an all-boys Catholic high school that was mostly white. There wasn't a whole lot of minorities in the school. And he failed miserably because he had to deal with his neighborhood. So even though he was at this really expensive high school that was giving him the best education possibly, when he got home, he had to deal with his neighborhood homies who were bullying him and giving him crap and all of that. So when a kid that's a Black kid or Hispanic kid has to deal with that type of environment, it's a real struggle to be able to find the strength internally to say, I can push past all of this crap so I can really focus on what I want to do long term. And we all know it's hard to do that when you're 16, 17, when you're 10, when you're 5. Because you don't know that you don't know you'll be able to get through it. So there's that piece of education too that isn't really spoken about, is the people in your community directly in your neighborhood. Who are those people helping to support and push you through and encourage you?
Yeah, we saw a lot of that when we were at Kaplan, and first generation kids coming through who just not only didn't have a support structure, but their friends were like, who do you think you are? What makes you so special, and having to fight through that is definitely hard. What about the white people in your school? Were they accepting and supportive of you and where you were trying to go, or were you really getting it from both sides?
No, that's the funny part. They were super accepting. I think probably, 90% of my friends, my sister's friends, my brother's friends are all white. And they were super supportive. My brother was valedictorian of his senior class. And, all of our friends were white and all went to college and all were super supportive. And not all our friends were, all white, but the ones that were Black, there was a very small group, and that small group ended up going to college too. But we didn't have that problems with the white kids, which is so incredibly odd to me now that I say that out loud. But it's just, again, it's, you would think with the Black culture and with Hispanic culture, and I definitely think in Hispanic culture views education way, way differently just because of their economical situation. They know that breaks the cycle for their people is that why wouldn't more Black kids, families really push their kids to get an education, whether it is a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, or some skills at like a trade school so that they can be something and own something, right? The American dream is to own a home and, those types of things. And so why is that not part of our plan? I don't understand that. And why is it equivalent to being white? Why is it doing that equivalent to being white? That's something I've never really understood. And then why aren't resources given to those kids who do come from underserved populations? Because, within that group of kids, there could be the next Einstein. There could be the next person who finds the cure for cancer or finds the cure for cystic fibrosis or the next cool invention that's really going to take us to the next level in this country. Like that person could be a hidden gem and you just don't know it because nobody really gave them the support or interest, right? I think a lot of it is if kids find that teachers and guidance counselors are interested in them, that raise the level of their expectation and what they can do.
Yeah, so much of the conventional schooling system does not honor young people as being fully human. Mm-hmm. They're just cogs in the wheel. They need to do what they're told. And if they do exactly what I tell them to do, then I'll give them a good grade. If they don't, I won't.
Yeah.
And so you're not getting a lot of people about like, what could you be? Who do you want to be? What can you do? And I do feel like there's just so much lost potential, and not just like in terms of like what you're talking about, like curing cancer or something, but just like lost potential for happiness for them in their life, know, and just like helping people find a spot of joy and helping them figure out how to create a career out of that. So if you like what you're hearing or you don't, and you want to come on and talk about it, go ahead and visit greenfieldsacademy.com and let us know that you want to be on the podcast and you want your opinion to be heard. I'd love to hear from you. Racism in the workplace or when you're at college, it sounds like high school was pretty accepting for you, but like as you moved outside of Nebraska, which sounds also a little bit weird to say, like Nebraska was a good, integrated, safe place.
No. I mean, yes and no. And it's funny you made that statement because I remember coming home for Christmas. At the time, my brother, who was at Harvard, who's living in Boston, my sister was living in San Francisco, getting her undergrad at the Art Institute. And I was still I think I was in Chicago, so I'd already graduated. I was in Chicago working, and my sister and I were home in Omaha for Christmas, and we're walking around the mall, finishing up our Christmas shopping, and we were looking around, we're like, golly, we were like, Omaha's really white. Like we were raised in a really white town. Like what, like it just blew our minds because at the time when you're in it, you didn't think about it. You're, moving and shaking, you're doing your thing. And then you come back and you just realize how really incredibly white the town that you grew up in was. Which is also fascinating because when my sister finished her master's, she came back to Omaha and she eventually became a tenured professor at the University of Nebraska of Omaha and emerged in the art culture, which is everybody, everything, all the things. And so there still is race. I mean, I think we saw racism differently as we got into our professional lives. And I think sometimes, I tell my husband, who is white, that if Black people were upset about every little microaggression that happened to them, which can be daily, if not hourly sometimes, all white people would be dead. Because we'd be angry all the time, wanting to hurt, kill, maim, because it's a lot. And you just can't go through your day on guard all the time because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of energy. So sometimes when racism shows its face, you don't necessarily see it right away because your brain is not there thinking about it because you're doing your thing, you're going through life, you're working on a project, you're collaborating on a team, so forth and so on. But there is in the workplace, because I've always been taught that I always had to do better. I had to be better. I had to speak better. I had to communicate better. I had to show less emotions than my white counterparts, because there was a stereotypical image of a Black woman. And if I wanted to get ahead, I had to do all those things because my white counterparts, it was natural for them. It's already going to be happening. I had to just go that extra mile. And then being a woman on top of it makes it even more fun, because then I got to do those extra things too, because I'm a woman. I don't always get the seat at the table, so I got to prove that worth there too. So it can be extremely challenging at times. And I have a recent situation where, I'm the president of my community organization, and we have a couple gardens in our neighborhood. And one of my garden chairs is in a fight, and she's a woman, she's a white woman, and she's in a fight with the other garden chair, who happens to be a white gay man, and he can be very aggressive and very curt. And she is like a bull in a china shop, and she has a tone, and she's not very nice either. And so, not getting anywhere with her in the conversation, I said, what would you like to do about this? What is it that you want to do? And she's like, well, I just want to let you know, because if it happens again, I'm going to go after him. I said, okay, but how about I mediate the conversation so everybody can get all their grievances out on the table and blah, blah, blah. And she says to me, she goes, well, I don't know if you'd be a good mediator because you have a very strong personality. And I laughed, and then I said, I do have a strong personality, and that's why you want me to mediate, because I don't want somebody who doesn't, and you two bowl over her. But after the conversation was over and I started thinking about this, I said to myself, now, as a Black person and as a Black professional, as a Black woman, I get a lot of feedback about my communication style, and I'm very direct, and how I should, change that and mold that and soften that. White women don't get the same type of feedback, because I've encountered quite a few of them that are very much direct and driven and bulls in china shops and just, really like aggressive. And if that was a person of color, they would get so much feedback about, you can't do that. You shouldn't say that. If you do that, you're an angry Black woman. And I was just like, golly, the racism when it comes to even just that piece of it is very fascinating to me, that they don't have to change who they are, their style, but people of color do, because you can't function in a corporate environment if you do that. It's just the same with women and men, right? If a woman was very aggressive, very assertive, she's labeled, a certain way, versus if a man is that way, he's being a leader, he's being, he's thinking forward, he's all these positive things. And so, yeah, there is definitely racism in the workplace. And I've thought about even emailing the CEO of LinkedIn, the new CEO of LinkedIn, and expressing him to my two situations that happened at LinkedIn, and to see what he would say about it. Because I do wonder, with all of this, with George Floyd and all the conversations that are happening, how much of our world is really going to change when it comes to viewing people of color in a work environment, in a non-professional work environment, on the street, at the grocery store, in an educational setting. What is that going to look like going forward?
I don't know. We had Ferguson happen a few years back.
Yep.
It certainly doesn't feel like much changed coming out of that.
Nope.
There were more consent decrees and that type of stuff that were put in place by the Obama administration, looking at kind of inconsistently policed areas and things to get them better. And then the Trump administration came in and basically said, we're not doing consent decrees anymore and we're going to take them away. But I also didn't see a lot of change with the consent decrees. It was just more of the same. Mm-hmm. We haven't talked much about like police situations or police brutality, that type of stuff. Have you had run-ins with the police in the past?
I have been lucky enough not to have any run-ins as a young person with the police. I did get pulled over a year ago, roughly, which was very nerve-wracking. So I was on my way to Springfield, Illinois, to meet a client. I was in a rental car, I had on an Oxford and a sweater, so dressed professionally. I got pulled over downstate and I freaked out. Like my nerve, all of a sudden my stomach drops. I'm shaking. I'm like, oh crap. I pull over. First I'm like, hands on the steering wheel. Where's my purse? Where's my driver's license? Where's the rental agreement? And the police officer comes, she comes, and it was a woman. So thank God for that. And she came on the passenger side and she said, do you know why I pulled you over? And I said, officer, I really don't. And she's like, you were following too closely to the cars in front of you because there was a line of us. So I'm like, okay, all right, good. Okay, good. And then she asked me a series of questions. Where are you going? What are you doing? Who do you work for? She's like, because you have a uniform on. And I looked at her. I'm like, I have an Oxford and a sweater on. I'm like, I'm going to a client meeting. She's like, oh, and I was kind of like, okay, that was a weird question. And lucky, she took my license, and luckily enough, she just gave me a warning. But it was very scary. It was nerve-wracking. But my white friends will never feel that way.
I won't say all of them. I have what I consider to be a healthy fear of the police. But I'll tell you what, I don't know any of my white friends who've gotten pulled over for following too closely or been asked profiling questions during a stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too, my husband and I went to Savannah, Georgia for an anniversary trip a couple years ago. And we flew into Charleston and drove to Savannah. And I said to him, and we had to take back, it's a 2-lane highway. And I said, you're driving the car. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. And this was right after Sandra Bland had been, that whole situation with her. And I'm like, I'm not driving in this house. You're driving. And he was like, seriously? I'm like, oh, seriously? Like, we're not having this argument. You're driving the car. I'm in the passenger seat. So I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to do that. But I wanted to feel safe. And I figured if he got pulled over as the white man, it might be a little bit easier to deal with than me.
It's a lot of those small things, regardless of, you're a successful professional woman who's done a lot of amazing things that I know of. I'm sure you've done lots of amazing things I don't know anything about. What are your hopes that come out of all the protests? And it does to me feel different than what happened in Ferguson or what's happened with some of the other things. It feels somehow bigger and broader. But what do you hope comes out of this?
I hope, and I had said this to my husband even before all this went down a couple years ago, that I think we were watching a 60-minute thing and about police and what particular community. And I hope that policing is changed in the sense that it becomes more community-based. And the phrase defunding the police is very polarizing for a lot of people. And I wish there was a different word that was used, because I think a lot of people are scared that it's going to be, everybody's going to run around with guns and try to self-police. And that's not what it is. But I really do think that we need to get to some level of community policing, because I should know who the police officers are in my neighborhood. And my police officers in my neighborhood, in my ward, should at least recognize that I live in that neighborhood. They may not know my name, and that's okay, but that I live in that neighborhood. And they need to get out of their cars, and they need to walk the blocks, and they need to be involved. And not every community in Chicago has a community organization or a block club or whatever, but they should know who those people are, and they should show up to our community meetings that we have at least twice a year. Because I think when people know each other and know that the human being in that uniform, and know that there's human beings that are not in that uniform, there's a level of trust that gets built. And there's a level of security that is built. And if we can do that, I think that will change a lot. And I also think that the training and the how to restrain a person that's been arrested should definitely re-examine, because some of those, like, why are you standing on somebody's neck? Like, why is that even a restraint? Good God. why is it if you're going to shoot somebody, and I know this sounds so probably ridiculous, but why can't you shoot them in the leg? Why can't you shoot them in the arm? Why is it the back? Why is it the chest? You know what I mean? The upper part of your body where you could kill somebody. So I just think that we're in a society right now where a lot of that needs to be re-examined and looked at. And I'm hoping that that's what Lori, our mayor, lovely Mayor Lightfoot, would do, is that she would take a step back and say, okay, let's look at this from a community standpoint. How can we be better? And let's us be the city that takes that charge for the rest of these bigger cities like New York, like LA, Dallas, San Fran, things like that, because I think it would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. That phrase, defund the police, sounds, it's just a poor choice of messaging. It makes for a good chant. But, are you familiar with what happened in Camden, New Jersey?
I am. I just learned about it this past weekend, and we were watching, I think it was George Stephanopoulos and Christie was on, and he was talking about how the crime rate has gone down, the murder rate has gone down. All of those things have changed quite a bit. And I think that's really where we really need to get to that point where, and I think it also helps too that kids will want to be police officers again, right? They're going to want to say, that's a noble career for me, because I know who these people are. I know they do good things, that kind of thing. And I do think we need to shake out the police who are white supremacists and racists and have problem with people of color and with women, and all of those people need to go. They need to go, period.
Yep. And I'd go one step further, even just people who are just bullies, right? Who the reason they carry the badge is so they can show you who's in charge. We need much better vetting. And we need better ways of getting the bad apples out. I think that's one of the biggest problems with the union is they almost believe there's no such thing as a bad cop.
Right.
And, teachers unions, be in education too, they have the same thing. There's no such thing as a bad teacher. And until you're willing to police your own, you are always going to be pushed on. And then so people who don't know the story about Camden, they did, quote unquote, defund the police. They dismantled the department. They put it back together in a much more community policing. They built up a drug and social services to be able to help people with other things, so that every time someone needs help from someone, they don't show up with a gun and escalate things. There's a lot of de-escalation training. And, when Mona says that the crime rate went down, it plummeted.
Yeah.
And I believe the number for complaints against use of force went down 95%. Murders went down 80-something%. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't just small things. It was big. And Camden was known for being just horrible. I think it was the murder capital of the world for a while.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So those of you out there who don't know what defund the police means or what that might look like, police departments are a relatively new thing in our country. The first police squad started as looking for runaway slaves. And that's kind of the thing it was built on. And I think until we can weed out some of that foundation.
And what I love about that too is that it's not just big cities that these protests are happening, and it's not mid cities either. It's some of the smaller communities, cities in our country are having these protests, and it's really kind of amazing to watch. My nephew Mark, he is engaged to a woman. Her name is Chelsea. She's biracial. They live in Minneapolis, 8 blocks away from where George Floyd was killed. And talking to them, I think probably the first week of the protest, they were saying how the police department there and why this whole defund police thing going on right now up there is a lot of the police don't live in Minneapolis anymore. Like in Chicago, you're required to live within city limits. They don't live in the city. They also, their union representative person is a white supremacist and wears alt-right badges on his jacket. And so there's a lot of that breeding of that behavior and attitude in their, in their current police force. So it makes sense why their city council said 9 to 13 or 13 to 9, and whatever the vote was, that they wanted to defund the police. And the mayor's having a really hard time saying, yes, we're going to do that. But, it needs to be done. And then a week ago, his fiance, Chelsea, she's from a little rinky-dink town in Iowa. She posted pictures. Her community, her town had protests, and it was white kids and black kids and old and young. And she was like so proud that her community, who she always I ran from it because being a biracial kid, my mom's black, and she goes, it was not the greatest place to be raised. But to have that show up in your community, it's not just the big cities that are driving this vocal change. It's starting to really seep down into other places we're not used to seeing. And I'm hopeful too. I'm hopeful too that some young person will rise up to the top and really kind of take the charge to help, lead the change.
Yeah, I do hope that it's different, but it also feels different. There does feel like there's more sense of change is coming rather than beat your head against the machine. And I think that's a good thing. And, what do you think the obligations of parents are to teach our children about race and racism?
Oh, wow. I think it's a great question because it's a hard question to answer, because I think when you don't live in a racially mixed area, it's hard to teach people about race because you don't see it every day. But you got to do something. You got to do some level of it. And I do think that being able to teach your child that everybody is the same when you pull back the layers of what you see in a person. So if you cut me, I bleed red. If I scrape up my knee, it's quote unquote white. I mean, the skin color, we're all pink on the inside, all of us, But I also think it's important to teach children about what the history looks like when you are a white child, a black child, an Asian child. And again, in my lovely neighborhood, we quote unquote call it Mayberry because it's well-to-do, high level jobs, expensive homes, that kind of thing. There was a woman who I met several years ago at a party, and this was right when the women's march movement stuff was happening. And one of my neighbors is, part of the group that started it here in Chicago. And this woman had adopted a black child. And so she had asked me, she goes, are you going to walk? Are you going to march in the women's movement? I said, no, I'm not. And she goes, why not? And I said, because the women's movement is not about women of color. And she goes, well, what do you mean? And I go, you have a black daughter. Need to teach her what her history is from a black person perspective and a woman perspective. I said, because you as a white woman only know part of it. You only know that the women's movement was for the things that were important for the white woman culture. That it didn't speak to better pay, healthcare, childcare for women who were black and white, who were working class and needed that support so that they can continue to work. So my suggestion would be to teach your black daughter what that looks like, what that history means, because it's very different than your history. So I think telling the right history is what we need to teach our children. And it's very challenging because the schools don't cover everything. And having, if you can try to have multiple racial friends, that's also important too. But I do think talking to your kids, but letting them understand that everybody's the same underneath that skin color. We all bleed the same. We're all pink on the inside. That's important. That's important. And that there's different struggles for everybody.
No, and I think that's how I grew up. Was one of my friends from high school, she knew the exact number because she was Asian. In our graduating class of 300, there were 6 people of color. And so there wasn't much of a conversation about it, but the message was, in my generation, it was, be colorblind, right?
Yeah.
That was the piece. And one of the things I've come to want to be part of more since these protests started is push more of an anti-racist agenda. And so that's what we're looking to get into Greenfields next year, which I guess kind of like baits the question some. But what do you think? What do you think schools' role like so? One is talking in your familial setting where you're sharing your values, you're sharing your belief systems, making sure your children understand that. But from a school perspective, what's the role of the school in helping with this?
I think the role of the school really is to teach that, we're all here striving to have the same level of life and the basics, right? Food, shelter, clothing. Those are it. That's it. That's all we ever, and love. Those 4 things. Those are the 4 things we all want. No matter what color you are, how much money you have, how much money you don't have, what kind of car you drive. Those are the basic things that all humans need. But the other thing we all need is to be able to connect to each other based on similar experiences, and I think school's a great place to teach kids how to collaborate, how to play, how to dream, how to story tell, how to fantasize about what the world could look like one day. I think all of those things are super important, and because those are really the skills that help us get through life. Is, do I play well in the sandbox with others? That's an important question. Yes. Do you? Yes. Do you not? No. How do we fix that? And exploring dreams, right? That's why I love reading books. I think one of my fondest memories of you when I worked with you was that you were really upset about the books in your neighborhood compared to the books in another neighborhood, an underserved population neighborhood. And you were like, I'm going to do something about this, which is I'm going to collect the books in my neighborhood for the kids who are not reading them anymore, and I'm going to donate them. Like teaching children that if you have a dream, a thought that you want to change the world, let's figure out how to do that, and giving them the skills and the ability to do that, because that's what's going to be important to other people. And I think that and volunteering in communities where you're not familiar with is really important to show that, everybody doesn't live like you live. Everybody doesn't look like you look. And everybody's parents are not men and women. They're women and women, and they're men and men. And I think all of those things are important in schools to teach and to be able to allow a safe place for kids to be able to talk about those things. Because they don't learn it at home. They learn a specific ideal at home. And when it's challenged, it makes that kid, I hope, a more thoughtful person. I remember a long time ago, my friend is a Republican, her family, they're staunch Republicans. Her niece at the time, I think, was like 7 or 8. And we were all at dinner together at her mom's house. And the niece said to me, I can't be friends with anybody who's not a Republican. And I said, oh, really, Ellie? She goes, yeah, I just can't be friends with them. I said, well, that's really sad to me because I'm a Democrat. So that means we can't be friends. And she was sitting on her dad's lap when we had this conversation. And she looked at me like, I just broke her heart. Like, oh, crap. I like you. We can't be friends. And then when her father heard that conversation, his look on his face was like, oh, crap. I'm teaching my kid this. But she's exposed to Mona. So how do I, you know what I mean? So those things, school is a way for us to really kind of think outside the box and really learn how to function in the world.
Yeah, I think that Republican thing, it speaks to whether or not her dad told her or tried to teach her that, like, you can't be friends with Democrats, may not have ever been said. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you overhear the comments about those damn liberals or whatever it is. Why do they do and when we become tribal in our communications, that starts to, education is life.
Yeah.
You are learning all the time. And the real question, like, what are the lessons that your children are taking away from your actions as much as what you are actively trying to tell them?
I agree. And racism is part of that conversation, right? You may not say, it's like saying, oh, I have a Black friend, or I have a Jewish friend, or I have a Mexican friend. It's not sometimes your action, sometimes it's not the word, sometimes it's your actions on how you respond to those people. Or like just said it, those people, But yeah, it's not always words. It's definitely actions.
I really like the idea of encouraging, if not facilitating, young people to volunteer in communities other than the ones that they reside. I think that could be a powerful piece, because when we talk about community, we often do talk about like your community starts with your family, moves out to the people you know, people who live near you. And if we broaden that sense of like the world community and being ingrained in other communities is a really important thing. So
yeah, I agree.
I think we'll definitely take that put that one in the hopper.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I try to do. I try to volunteer because I think I'm an able-bodied human being. I should be able to give back.
Well, I think you do a fantastic job of giving back. All the volunteering you've done, your willingness to come on today and talk about racism to a privileged old white guy. Thanks for educating me and for your input and taking the time. It's really been a pleasure, Mona.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. This was really great. Thank you so much for inviting me.